Hi. So I'm going to be talking about children's explanatory styles, the origin of optimistic thinking, and I'm going to be reading from the book called Learned Optimism by Martin Seligman. What he says is that if we have a negative way of talking to ourselves or a negative explanatory style, we have that because we've learned it that way and we have continued to use it in our lives. And in the book, he also talks about how to change it. But what he focuses most on throughout the book is how these uh, ways of thinking and explaining to ourselves how life works happens. So I thought it would be very interesting to read a chapter of the book, which is called The Origin of Optimism, Children and Parents. And I've already done 2 videos about it, discussing 3 hypotheses that he has suggested. If you want to see the first video in that, there is a link, and I will also link it down in the description below. So continuing with that topic, what we've already discussed is how a mother's explanatory style is something that a child picks up, and also how the child picks up other explanatory styles of other adults, which are very, very important in their lives, like teachers as well. Just a recap, what he says is something that makes the recipe for a negative explanatory style are 3 things: a thought, or the way that you're talking to yourself, if it is permanent, pervasive, and personal. You are, if it has these 3 components and you're talking in a negative way, then this is the recipe for having a negative explanatory style. So this is the crux of his argument, and he's explained it very well as to how, if we undo these 3 things in the way that we talk to ourselves and our children, we can actually probably help in having a more optimistic mindset for ourselves and also for our children. So the last part of this chapter is a very interesting one, which is that which is called children's life crises. Now, the first 2 was more relatable to most people, but there are many children who've grown up in very, very disturbing circumstances sometimes, like wars and wars at home, which are domestic problems that happen, or several things that can contribute to that: illnesses of themselves, of their parents, death, loss, so many things that can happen. So this is something that he's talking about here. I'm not going to be reading the whole thing, but I have read enough to give you a gist of what he's talking. He starts by talking about a sociologist called Glenn Elder. Now, Glenn Elder had done a very interesting longitudinal study. Longitudinal study means following subjects for a very, very long time in their lives. He followed them for about 60, almost 60 years of their lives, and he interviewed them and their, their children and grandchildren as well. So he was a man who did a very big landmark study. And what Glenn's outlook on this particular thing, which is the children's life crises, how does that influence one's explanatory style, was that he saw that children of the Great Depression, they were women or girl children who were from 2 income groups, which was like a middle income group and a low income group. The middle income group children, when they lost everything during the Great Depression, however, somehow the families made up for it later in life, and then life became better, and they started to think optimistically and have better lives, because life generally did get better for them. But however, whereas in the low income group, there were children who could not really make sense of the loss and never really recovered, because their families could never recover from the losses that happened during the Great Depression. So his outlook or his speculation um, was that when you face such a big crisis when you're young, that really shapes in the way that you're thinking and your outlook in life and everything else. So what Martin Seligman did was that he uh, collaborated with Glenn and another person called Chris Peterson, and they, with some powerful tools, which is questionnaires and everything that he had actually made up, concluded that most of Glenn's assumptions were actually correct. Not assumptions, I would say speculations were largely correct. So, another thing that he has also mentioned in the book was that there was another professor called George Brown. What George Brown had done was, in his life, he spent a long time in poverty stricken areas of South London, interviewing housewives at great lengths. And he factored down three things for um for the mental health, or the people who actually think negatively and think positively. What he said was that um, loss, extremely great loss, like the loss of a mother for for a child, it is something that children see as permanent and pervasive, and it really shapes the way that they look at other losses in their lives as something that is extremely like a hopeless situation, extremely life changing, not being able to recover. So, um, let me read something from there. The death of the mother of a young girl is permanent and pervasive loss. So much of what a young girl does depends on her mother. This is true particularly before puberty, before boys and daughters' teenage crowd become partial substitutes. If the reality of our first major loss shapes how we think about the causes of future losses, George's findings make sense. These unfortunate children learn, just as the lower class children did during the Great Depression, that loss is permanent and pervasive. So their mother leaves and never comes back, and their whole life is now impoverished. Losses later in life get interpreted this way: he's dead, he's never coming back, and I can't go on. So this is very, very interesting, because the way that he is telling us about major losses, and especially if children cannot really make sense of what is happening. Because if you look at the Great Depression or things like that, these are things that are happening at a big, big level. There are so many factors that are taking place in them and shaping them to come into existence. So children are really gullible, and they do not understand. And if we are not able to explain to them uh, and remind them that there is more to life and this is not permanent, even though the situations around us look extremely permanent right now, they will tend to look at things and perceive life as, and loss as something, basically loss as something which is completely permanent and completely pervasive, and not be able to come to terms with that. So this was quite an interesting read, and it does make sense to me for my own life. But I'm wondering how it's making sense to you in your life. Have you gone through certain extreme conditions or loss in your life? Think about them and see how they have actually shaped the way that you're thinking now in your current life as an adult, or as whatever age you are watching this video on. And this would be very valuable work, because the way that you move forward is determined by the way that you start to think now. So make the choice to think better and make your life better, and follow me for other videos. I will be doing more Martin Seligman chapters in my other videos. I hope you're enjoying them. They've really helped me a lot. So thank you. Please like and share and subscribe.